Inside ADX Florence, the harsh diet of America's most dangerous prisoners. Before we begin, I want you to imagine something. Imagine waking up in a concrete box so small your voice echoes back at you. No sunlight, no fresh air, just the hum of fluorescent lights and the sound of your stomach growling. Now imagine this. You're locked inside the most unforgiving prison in America, ADX Florence, the place the government sends people they want to disappear. A place designed not just to break your body, but to wear down every corner of your mind. Most people think they know how brutal supermax life is. The isolation, the silence, the 23 hours a day behind steel doors. But almost nobody talks about the thing that eats away at inmates slowly, silently, and permanently. The food. Because at ADX, food isn't just a meal. It's another weapon, another layer of punishment, another reminder that inside these walls, even something as basic as eating becomes a battle for survival. Tonight, we're pulling back the steel curtain. You're going to hear what inmates actually eat, how the system uses food to control the most dangerous men in America, and the shocking truth behind the supermax diet that has driven some prisoners to violence, madness, and even death. And by the time you hear what's on the menu, you'll understand exactly why inmates call it the silent torture. But this story isn't just about cold trays and mystery meat. It's about a hidden system, a series of psychological games, a diet engineered not just to feed the body, but to break the spirit. From the Nutriloaf punishment meal banned in multiple states, to the calorie-controlled trays designed to keep inmates weak, to the screams from cell blocks when dinner never arrives, to the inmates who swear the food isn't just bad, but dangerous. And at the heart of this story lies one inmate, someone who uncovered something inside ADX's kitchen that should have never been found, something that nearly sparked a riot in the most secure prison in America. This is the part of ADX Florence they never want the public to see. This is the part correctional officers refuse to talk about. And this is the part inmates say scars them long after they've left those concrete walls. Welcome to what inmates eat in ADX Florence, the harsh diet of America's supermax. If you're ready, let's step inside the kitchen of hell. Welcome to the Supermax menu. If you want to understand ADX Florence, you have to understand one thing first. Control. Every movement, every sound, every breath an inmate takes is monitored. And food is no exception. Inside ADX, meals aren't served in a cafeteria. There are no food lines, no human conversations, no choice. Every tray slides through a metal slot like a feeding hole in a zoo enclosure. A guard pushes it in, the inmate pulls it out, and for most men here, that tray is the only human interaction they'll have all day. But what's on that tray is even more shocking. Most people imagine prison food as bland, cheap, maybe even disgusting, but still edible. ADX Florence is different. Their diet is designed with one purpose: to keep inmates alive and compliant. 3 meals a day, roughly 2,600 calories. But it's not the number that breaks them, it's the quality. Breakfast isn't eggs or cereal. It's usually a rock-hard muffin, a packet of powdered milk, something pretending to be oatmeal, and a fruit cup so syrupy it tastes like chemicals. Lunch? Often a bologna sandwich, so thin you could read a book through it. A handful of stale chips, and a cookie that has a texture of chalk. Dinner? That's when the real misery starts. Lukewarm casserole, often unidentifiable, sometimes gray, and a scoop of beans or rice, so overcooked it's practically mush. But here's the part they never show in documentaries. Everything is made in bulk, not by chefs, not by nutritionists, but by inmates from lesser security units. Men who have no culinary training, no reason to care, and sometimes, according to ex-staff, every reason to sabotage. And when the food arrives at ADX, it's not steaming hot. It's not fresh. It's barely even warm. By then, the meal has traveled through locked gates, multiple checkpoints, and endless metal detectors. What arrives at the cell door is a cold, soggy, flavorless plate that makes airline food look like a 5-star steakhouse entree. One former guard said this: And I want you to listen carefully. The food isn't meant to be enjoyed. It's meant to remind them they're here to be punished. But food in ADX is more than punishment. It's currency. It's leverage. It's power. Some inmates starve themselves deliberately just to get attention. Some hoard bread for days just to feel like they own something. Anything. Some refuse meals for weeks, protesting conditions no one on the outside ever hears about. And then you have the ones who snap, the ones who take their tray and throw it at the door, the ones who scream for hours because they swear the food is being tampered with, the ones who refuse to eat at all until they're force-fed through a tube. But behind all of this, behind every spoonful and every plate, lies something darker, something the prisoners don't know, something even some guards don't know, a secret hidden in the ADX kitchen program, one that a single inmate stumbled onto accidentally and uncovered something that was never meant to leave those concrete walls. And that inmate's discovery is what turns this from a prison story to a conspiracy that would shake ADX from the inside. The inmate who knew too much before the discovery, before the rumors, before the chaos that would ripple through the supermax. There was just a name, Darius Kane. To the outside world, he was nothing more than another inmate number on a roster. But inside ADX, his reputation traveled cell to cell like electricity. Not because he was violent, though he had been. Not because he was dangerous, though many believed it. But because Darius was observant. He wasn't the strongest. He wasn't the loudest. He wasn't the kind of man who made threats or demanded attention. No, he was the type who watched. Quietly, patiently, like a man who knew the system was built to crush him, but still wanted to understand every bolt and screw holding together. Darius had been in ADX for 6 years when things began to unravel. 6 years of silence. 6 years of trays sliding through his slot. 6 years of meals that tasted like punishment. He noticed things most inmates ignored. How breakfast arrived colder on some days and others. How the portion seemed to shrink when new guards arrived. How lunch sometimes had a faint metallic smell that didn't match anything he recognized. But the real shift, the moment everything changed, came on a night that should have been ordinary. It was dinner. A scoop of beans, a small roll, and something labeled meat casserole. Nothing unusual. But the smell was wrong. Not rotten, not spoiled, just off. An odd chemical tang that hit the back of his throat before he even opened the lid. At first, he thought it was just another terrible meal, until he heard something. Coughing, choking, retching, echoing faintly from multiple cells down the tier. In a place as silent as ADX sound carries, especially suffering. One inmate slammed on his door. Another yelled for medical. A third screamed that his tongue was burning. And all of them had one thing in common. They'd eaten the casserole. Guards stormed through the tier, masks on, gloves on, like they were responding to a contamination. Inmates were told to back away from their trays. Some were ordered to place them outside their slots. Others were told to flush everything down their steel toilets immediately. No explanation. No apology. Just orders. And in ADX, orders aren't suggestions. The trays disappeared. The tier fell silent. Dinner never came again that night. But Darius didn't forget. Not the smell. Not the reaction. Not the way guards whispered to each other, like they were trying to hide something. And that was the moment he realized something was wrong. Not just with the meal, but with the entire system. Because in a supermax where everything is controlled, monitored, and recorded, bad food doesn't just happen. Food doesn't make multiple inmates sick by accident. And guards don't panic, unless there's something to fear. For the next week, Darius watched every tray, every portion size, every smell. He even began eating only small bites here and there, waiting, watching, testing. And then something odd happened. His breakfast muffin had a small, dark stain on the bottom, like it had been placed on a dirty surface, or dropped, or something else entirely. When he pressed on the stain, his fingertip came away with a faint black powder. And that was the moment he knew this wasn't paranoia. It wasn't imagination. Something was happening in the ADX food chain. Something deliberate. Something hidden. And Darius Kane was determined to expose it, even if it meant risking everything. Because in a place like ADX, food is life. And whatever was happening wasn't meant to keep anyone alive. The kitchen ghost. To understand what Darius was stepping into, you need to know something about ADX Florence that rarely makes the news. The kitchen isn't inside the supermax. It's located in a completely separate building, staffed mostly by low-security inmates from the nearby federal prison camp. These men cook the meals, box them, label them, and send them through a heavily monitored chain of custody until they eventually reach the solitary pods of ADX. At least, that's how it's supposed to work. But there's a nickname whispered in federal circles. A nickname most officers pretend not to know. They call it the kitchen ghost. Not a person, not a legend, a warning, a reminder that once food leaves the camp's kitchen, nobody truly knows what happens to it. Trays go missing for minutes at a time. Cart seals are sometimes broken. Ingredients mysteriously change. Meals arrive altered, portioned differently, or with strange textures that don't match the week before. And the ghost? It's the idea that someone or something is manipulating the food before it gets to the inmates. Most staff laugh about it, joke that inmates are dramatic, blame it on supply shortages or packaging errors. But others, the ones who've worked at ADX for years, they don't laugh, because every once in a while, a meal arrives that shouldn't exist, something that wasn't on the menu, something ordered by no one, and every time that happens, someone in the prison gets sick. Which brings us back to Darius. He didn't know the stories. He didn't know the rumors. But he was about to learn in the most dangerous way possible. It started with a whisper, not a friendly whisper, not a warning from an inmate, but something subtle. A message slipped under his door on a torn piece of paper. A note that simply said, "Stop. You're not supposed to see this." No signature. No handwriting he recognized. Just those words, written in shaky strokes, the kind that suggested someone rushed to write it before they were seen. Darius stared at the note for hours. His pulse never slowed, because in ADX, nobody passes messages unless they're desperate or terrified. And if someone was terrified, that meant Darius wasn't imagining things. 36 hours later, breakfast arrived. Oatmeal, powdered milk, a banana, but the banana had a small cut across the peel, straight, clean, surgical. Not the kind made by transport, the kind made intentionally. He opened it. Inside the fruit, shoved deep into the flesh, was another sliver of torn paper. One word, run. Darius's stomach turned, not because of fear, but because there was nowhere to run inside ADX. No yard, no hallways to roam, no space to escape. The message might as well have said, prepare. And then came the final sign. The moment he knew something bigger was happening. That evening, dinner arrived later than usual. Much later. So late the silence of the unit felt heavier, like the air was waiting. When the tray finally slid through the slot, the guard didn't look at him, didn't speak, didn't breathe, just shoved it forward with shaking hands. On the tray was the same casserole that made half the unit sick the week before. But this time, something was different. There was a symbol drawn on the underside of the tray, a small black circle, smeared like someone used a dirty glove to make it. Darius lifted the tray, tilted it under the light, studying it, and then he froze, because that symbol wasn't random. He'd glimpsed it once before on the stain beneath his breakfast muffin. The same black powder. The same eerie pattern. Someone was marking the meals. Someone was tracking what food went to which inmate. Someone was watching, closer than any guard. And whatever they were planning, Darius had just stepped right into it. The ingredient that shouldn't exist. In ADX, every meal is identical. Every scoop, every portion, every speck of seasoning is regulated to the ounce. So when something changes, even slightly, inmates notice. And Darius noticed everything. The next morning, he did something dangerous, Something that could have earned him a disciplinary write-up, a cell extraction, or worse. He didn't eat his breakfast. Instead, he broke it apart, piece by piece, examining every item. The biscuit, the powdered eggs, the fruit cup. He wasn't sure what he was looking for, only that whatever made those other inmates sick had been hidden in something that looked ordinary. Then he found it. In the far corner of the tray, where the scrambled eggs had pooled into a yellow clump, there was a faint gray film, thin, dusty, barely visible unless the light hit it at the perfect angle. He touched it with his fingertip. It smeared like ash. Not pepper, not seasoning, not a natural part of any food he'd ever seen. His heart kicked against his ribs. It was the same substance he'd found under the muffin a week earlier, the same powder the symbol on the casserole tray had been drawn with. Someone wasn't poisoning meals at random. Someone was targeting specific trays, and someone wanted him to know. Later that day, the tier erupted with noise, a rare event inside ADX. Inmate after inmate slammed fists against steel doors. Some shouted requests. Others demanded to see medical staff. All of them were complaining about the same thing: stomach cramps, vomiting, dizziness, burning lips, and all of them had eaten breakfast. Darius sat on his concrete bunk, staring at his untouched tray. He wasn't sick, not because he was lucky, but because he'd listened to the warning. But now he had another problem, a bigger one. If someone was tampering with food, if someone was leaving messages, then that someone might have noticed that Darius didn't eat. And that meant one thing: he had become part of the experiment. That night, guards moved differently, quieter, faster. One officer walked cell to cell with a clipboard, checking names like he was taking inventory. Another carried a small device, something with a blinking light, that he held near the food slot like he was scanning for residue. But they said nothing. Nothing to the inmates. Nothing to each other. Silence in a place built on silence. Hours later, long after the lights dimmed into the pale nighttime glow, Darius heard something he'd never heard in his entire time at ADX. A knock, not on his door, not on the bars, on the wall behind his bunk. 3 soft taps. Pause. One more. He froze. Nobody knocks in ADX. Not unless they know exactly where you're sitting. Not unless they know the structure of the cells, and precisely how sound travels through the reinforced concrete. He leaned closer, barely breathing. On the other side of the wall, a voice whispered, hoarse, strained, terrified. You need to stop. They're monitoring the food program again. Darius whispered back, what's in it? There was a long, painful silence. Then, it's not for killing. It's for compliance. The voice trembled, choked, as though merely saying the truth out loud was dangerous. Darius whispered, who's doing it? But this time, no answer. Only the sound of someone backing away. Then a final whisper, barely audible through the wall. Don't let them know you know. Darius sat awake until morning, his mind spiraling through a list of possibilities. Corrupt staff? Rogue kitchen workers? A secret disciplinary program? None of it made sense. Until lunchtime arrived, and he saw what was waiting on his tray. A sandwich, a handful of lettuce, some chips, all normal, except the bread was marked, a tiny black, almost microscopic, burned into the crust, the same mark he'd seen twice before. And this time, he realized the truth. This wasn't sabotage. This wasn't random. This wasn't accidental. This was a system that marked inmates, one by one, and whatever the mark meant, he was next. The meal they can never escape. What happened to Darius Kane inside ADX Florence, what he uncovered, and what he survived, isn't just a story about prison food. It's a story about control. Because inside America's most secure prison, every tray, every crumb, every calorie is more than nourishment. It's a message, a reminder, a weapon. Inmates aren't fed to keep them healthy. They're fed to keep them obedient, predictable, manageable, and whether it was contaminated meals, mysterious markings, or a system designed in shadows by people no one will ever meet. The truth is simple. In ADX, food isn't just part of the punishment. It is the punishment. Most inmates who leave the supermax never talk about what they ate, but the few who do say the same thing. It doesn't just starve your body, it starves your mind. Some never recover their appetite. Some suffer lifelong stomach issues. And others, the ones who experience what Darius did, carry a paranoia that follows them long after the steel doors close behind them. Because when the people feeding you can also control you, you never truly eat in peace again. ADX Florence was built to break the world's most dangerous men, to isolate them, to silence them, to bury them in concrete and forgotten routines. But the truth? What breaks many of them isn't the walls. It isn't the isolation. It isn't even the sentence. It's the simplest, most human thing of all. A meal that tastes like fear. A meal that feels like a threat. A meal you can't refuse and can't escape. And if this is what we know, if these are the stories that slip through cracks, imagine what's still hidden inside the places cameras never reach. Behind locked kitchens, behind sealed carts, behind the trays pushed quietly through cold metal slots. Imagine what else we were never meant to see. But for now, this story ends the way every day ends in ADX Florence, with a tray sliding through a slot, a prisoner staring down at a meal he didn't choose, and a silent understanding that inside the most secure prison in America, the harshest punishment isn't the sentence, it's the diet. This has been What Inmates Eat in ADX Florence, the harsh diet of America's supermax. If you want more stories like this, raw, real, and unfiltered, you know what to do. Until next time, stay safe, stay aware, and remember, not everything inside a prison stays behind bars.